ask you, please, about your father, first of all. Do you know where he was born?
Yes, I do. My father was born in a little town called Shklov in the province of Mogilev in Russia.
In Russia?
Yes, by the Dnieper River. His father before him, his father actually was a scribe. He used to write Sefer Torahs. And my father was a religious man as well. And he learned his religion, of course, in his home country. But it was a time of persecution. In fact, he had an uncle that, to escape the Russian military regime, he hid himself in a cellar. And when they came to take him into the army, when they took the young people into the army, he was a boy of about 16. He took his eye out with a nail so that he shouldn't go to be a soldier. And there was such persecution there that my father...
This was your uncle that did this?
My father's... Yes, an uncle. It was an uncle,
I see.
Now, where can I go on from
there? When was your father born?
He was born in this place called Shklov.
When?
I don't know how it would work out. He died in 1974, and he was 92 in 1974.
I see. So he was.
When did he come here?
He must have come here in the late 1800s. In the late 1800s.
So.
And he married my mother, who also came from the same town, Shklov, in England, in the early 1900s, I believe.
So they both came from the same...
They both came
from
the same
little...
Did they
meet in England?
No, they knew each other in Russia. And that although they didn't leave Russia together as families, my father's father stayed in Russia, but the family moved to the Crimea. My grandfather, my Zeta, he moved to the Crimea with his second wife and a son, and my father's sisters and brother-in-laws and their family, they all moved to the Crimea. We found out after the war that everyone in his family had been killed by the Nazis. They lived in a place called Simferopol, near Sevastopol, which is by the Black Sea. But no one survived. My father and his brother came to England, and my mother and her family came to England, but they didn't come together. They met up again in England and married in England.
Can I ask you, do you know why your father actually left, and why it was only him, not the others that left?
Well, my father left with his brother, and he left also with a great friend of his, who, in fact, we are still friendly with the family now, although my father's friend who came over with him has died a long time ago. But I have kept in touch, of late only with a New Year's card, but with the family that came over from Russia with him as many, many years ago.
Do you, by any chance, did your father tell you about what sort of education they had in Russia, or how the persecution was effected? What happened to them?
Well, there were pogroms,
yes.
And the Jewish population from Shklov gradually melted away. Where they went to, we don't know. But my father originally wanted to go to America, but he landed in England. I don't think he had enough money to make the rest of the journey, so he stayed here. I think he went into a shelter. They called them shelters in those days.
Where about in England?
I think that was in the East End somewhere.
So he landed in the East End?
Yes, he came to the East End. He met up with my mother in the West End. He moved to the West End. That I'm talking about myself, have never lived in the East End. We were born in the West End. In fact, I was born almost under the post office tower.
Really? I know what you mean.
Yes.
Tottenham Street.
Now, of course, none of those streets are in existence anymore. There's Great Titchfield Street, bounded by Great Titchfield Street, Cleveland Street, and Carburton Street. That whole area is now the post office tower and its buildings. And that is where I was born.
Can I ask you you think your father must have been in his early 20s, perhaps, when he came over?
Probably, yes.
Do you know what he did when he first started?
My father was a tailor, and he came from a very religious family. He was religious himself. He was very learned in law, in Jewish law, but he was a sort of man that never pushed it down anybody's throat. Although we were brought up and we went to an Orthodox synagogue, in fact I was bar mitzvahed in a little shtibel in Soho Square. It's not in existence today. It was a little place, and I can remember it as it was yesterday. I was bar mitzvahed there.
Mrs. Zalkin,
yes.
What happened on Shabbat and during the holy services, the festivals? Did you?
Well, we kept the festivals,
yes,
and we kept Shabbat.
Yes, you did. You didn't.
Yeah,
did your
yes.
father work on Shabbat, or did he?
No,
he
I don't think he worked on Shabbat.
No.
It's a long time ago now.
Yes,
My mind is a little hazy about these things.
But you went to Cheder?
I went to Cheder in Soho Square. I learned everything I had to learn there.
And you went to school in the West End?
I went to school in what was then called Upper Marylebone Street, is now called New Cavendish Street. I went there, and from there I went to, they call them a central school in Camden Town. And then from there I went into my father's workshop when I was 15.
15. Did your father have a workshop in his home, or was it outside?
No, my father had a workshop in his home. He was a master tailor, and he employed 2 or 3 people.
Did you have any servants or anyone to help in the house or anything?
I think someone used to come in to do a few odd jobs, but it was a very precarious living in those days. I can remember that my father used to work to all hours. In fact, I can remember in World War I, incidentally, my father was a soldier for the British in World War I. He joined up in a regiment called the 38th Raw Fusiliers, which was a Jewish regiment. They called them the Judeans, and they fought in Palestine. So my father did service for the British. Incidentally, I was in the Royal Air Force for 4 years, so we come from a military family. What was the question before? Religious upbringing.
Yes.
Well, I think the majority of people in those days were in various degrees of orthodoxy.
You ate?
I wouldn't say that my father was very, very orthodox, although he kept a kosher home.
You did keep a kosher.
But
did you find it difficult to keep a kosher home?
no, there was no difficulty at all. It's very easy. I think it was far easier than it is today, because everybody was the same. In fact, where I lived in Howland Street as well, it was like a little ghetto, bounded by Howland Street, Cleveland Street, Fitzroy Street, Charlotte Street. It was a little ghetto, and everybody knew everybody else. And either the men were tailors, or bootmakers, or cabinet makers.
And the school that you went to?
When
were you born?
I was born in 1909.
1909. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had a brother and 2 sisters. Of those, my brother and sister died during this war, and I have another sister, incidentally, which is almost round the corner. But my brother and sister died within 2 years of each other. There was a time of the air raids, and I don't know whether it was draft or whatever it was, bad accommodation, running into shelters, but they both died of tuberculosis within 2 years of each other. That was in the last war.
And you were born in 1909, and you were educated in England, in the Soho area.
Yes.
Did you find any anti-Semitism at school at all?
No.
No.
None
Nothing,
whatsoever.
No. Was there mainly Jewish boys and girls? Was it a mixed school?
No, it was a mixed school.
It was a mixed school, but...
A mixed school. The school is not there now. It's now a polytechnic. But I can't remember any anti-Semitism. In fact, the district where I lived was mostly Jewish people, strange as it may seem. There were very few Christian people. It was really a little ghetto.
Yes.
It's entirely different now, because Howland Street hasn't one of the original houses left. Not one.
And you went to this school. Did you win any scholarships from there?
No, no scholarships.
So what age did you leave your school?
I left the school at 15.
15.
I went to work for my father.
When, Mr. Zalkin, when you were at home, did you have books in the house? Did your father try to educate you?
My father could read English, but couldn't write. Although after the war he became a naturalised British subject. My mother, on the other hand, could write, but she couldn't read. So, and there was no such thing as television, and we had a gramophone, But my father used to read to us in Yiddish. And even now I've got upstairs 16 volumes of Sholem Esh.
Oh, I know.
And I've got a couple of volumes of Sholem Aleichem that belong to my father. And that is where I learned my Yiddish. In fact, when I was a little boy, Yiddish was spoken in the house. Yes, we spoke Yiddish. Of course, they gradually managed to speak English. And within 12 years, I know it's 12 years, because my sister, who's 12 years younger than I, can't speak Yiddish. My mother and father were then speaking English in the home, although...
Not Russian?
Not Russian at all.
Yiddish?
No, they could speak Russian, but they never spoke Russian at all. They spoke, when I was a little boy, it was just Yiddish. And gradually it turned into English. And my sister, who, as I say, is 12 years younger, cannot speak Yiddish, although I can.
It didn't confuse you in your learning that that they spoke to you in Yiddish and in
None
the school
whatsoever.
They spoke in English?
No, I spoke English as well.
Yes.
And probably through me they spoke English.
Can you remember anything about your childhood that stays in your mind? Perhaps when your father took you to shul, or what happened when your mum made Shabbat? Is there anything that stands
Nothing stands
in your
out
mind?
particularly,
Nothing
no. Not really, no.
So you then went into your father's business?
Father's
as a
workshop. It wasn't a business, it was a workshop.
Where he had 2 or 3 other people employed.
That's right.
Did he make the whole suit, or was he, like some of the tailors, I believe, make the trousers?
Well, he worked for a firm in Savile Row. He was a very good tailor. In fact, I worked for the firm as well. I don't know whether we can give names here. It doesn't really matter. But even up to the time that I went into the forces, I was making military uniforms for Gives and Hawkes and Huntsman and Company. We were making military uniforms. My father's a very good tailor, but I never liked tailoring.
Do you think he made a living? I mean, was he able to?
Yes, they made a living. We were never short, but we never had any affluence in the home, because tailoring in those days, they either had too much work where they could work day and night, or at the slack time you had nothing. And it was like that with everybody.
Could you stop it just?
We moved.
What age were you when you moved?
How old was I?
It was 1920...
3, was it?
No, later.
28? Oh, I don't remember.
32.
You were 32?
Yeah, we
No,
moved.
1932.
Oh, 1932.
Yeah,
You were born in 09.
We
so
moved
that's-
from the West End to
Warren
Hendon
Street.
Street. We lived in Warren Street at the time, and we moved to Hendon Central when Hendon Central was just being built up.
What made your father move there?
I don't know what made him move, but I think the fact that where we lived, the houses were coming down, and there was an estate being built up in Hendon Central, and we just moved there. I don't remember why.
You
You
went
were
to
at 19.
You must have been.
No, I was younger than that, Rosa, I think.
Not much.
1932 and you were born in 1909, so we can work it out. Did you go to, when you were living in the West End, in Warren Street, did you go to shul every Saturday or every Friday night?
To shul? No.
Or only just high days and holidays, was it?
That's right.
Just then? No other time? And your father, did he go to shul in the
My
West End?
father used to go, yes, we used to go to the place, to the shul in Soho Square.
Yes, but
On
only on high days and holidays, not during Saturdays or Fridays. No, just then. And did mother light candles on a Friday
Yes,
night?
yes.
Every Friday night?
Well, you're asking a
You
question that I just don't remember.
But I mean, it wasn't a ritual.
No, I don't think
Didn't
so.
make you dish.
I can't remember. It's a long way back, isn't it?
So you moved to Hendon. Do you know why your father decided to move there?
Well, there was an estate being built up, as I say, and
Oh,
the
yes.
West End. A lot of the houses were coming down there. In fact, the houses in Howland Street all came down, and the house we were living in Warren Street, that was coming down too. So we moved away. In fact, we were one of the pioneers, the Jewish pioneers, living in Hendon Central, and my mother used to come up by train back to the West End to do her shopping, because there weren't any shops in
Jewish
Hendon
shops.
Central. And the women, her friends in the West End who were left living in the West End, I can remember her saying that they're very surprised that we've moved to Hendon Central. Where will we buy herring? They used to ask her. Where will you buy this, that and the
Can
other?
I just go back one moment,
Yes.
Mrs. Zalkin, with the house? What did your father own the house in the West End, or did he rent it?
No, we rented the rooms.
It. You don't remember how much?
Oh,
perhaps?
no, I don't
Just-
remember at all. But he bought, on a mortgage of course, the house in Hendon Central.
And then you had left school, and what at that period, when you were in the West End, what did you do in the evenings? What hobbies did you have? Did you go to any Jewish clubs?
No, I was never a club person.
No. What did you do? What did you like to do? Apart from perhaps going to the cinema, which everybody did.
Well, everyone went to the cinema.
Did you do any sporting
No,
activities?
No,
Or
I'm not a sport.
no, or did you go to the theatre? Did you like the theatre, the family?
We never went to theatres.
Or
We'd go
concerts?
to cinemas, yes.
Cinemas, yes. I see. And then you moved to Hendon.
We moved to Hendon.
And did you carry on the tailoring there? Did you?
No, he had the workshop. He had a workshop in the West End, in Carburton Street.
Yes.
And I used to come to work every morning from Hendon Central to Carburton Street.
And then when did you meet your wife?
Oh, now that's an interesting story. When Rosa tells you her story, you'll realise how it all links up. But to answer your question, where did I first meet Rosa? I first met Rosa in Warren Street. Strange as it may seem, her family came from Germany and moved into the same house in Warren Street where we were living. She was 13 at the time and I was 16, that I remember.
So the house held more than one family?
Yes, there was two.
Two families.
We lived downstairs and my Rosa's family lived upstairs. That's where we first met. And strange as it may seem, she never spoke English. Only German. She's bilingual now. But I really should have her tell the story, but as you asked me a question, I'll mention this to you. She was born in England and went to Germany with a family when she was...
So that's my story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking...
So you met Rosa in the house?
In the
Warren
house,
Street.
yes.
And then when you moved to...
We moved to Hendon Central, and
What
a
happened
while
to you?
afterwards, Rosa's family moved to Neasden, and we lost touch. We met again.
In Cricklewood
We
Valley,
met again at Cricklewood Valley.
dancing.
So you liked dancing? That was a
Oh,
hobby.
everyone went to a dance.
Oh, you liked dancing?
Yes.
Oh, very good dancing.
Yes.
So that was a
That's
hobby.
where we.
That was a
That's
hobby,
where we
yeah.
met. When I say that's where we met, that's where we met, and she could speak English
At that time.
at that time. So now she speaks fluent German, and as you know, she has no German accent with her English. She also has no English accent with her German.
So you met in the house and then re-met in the Cricklewood Valley, which was...
Yes.
But we didn't go out then.
No.
No.
No, we still get together.
When did you get
Quite a long
together?
time after that.
Oh, it was
Yes.
quite a while after that. I remember her father was also in the tailoring, and I happened to be out of work at that particular time, and I met him in the street, and he said, why don't you come round and see the family? I said, well, I don't know. He said, are you working? I said, no, and he recommended me to a job. And that evening, after my first day at work, he said, come home and meet the family, and that's where I came back to Neasden. But Rosa at that time was friendly with another young man. But that's another story as well.
So where did you get married?
We married in
Raleigh Close.
Raleigh Close, in the synagogue in Raleigh Close, in 1937. Right?
We've just had our 50th
We had our
anniversary.
50th anniversary a
Nice
few
and
weeks
tall.
ago.
Nice and tall.
Yes, that's to answer
June,
your question.
June the 13th.
June the 13th.
And can I ask you where you had this,
The couple was there. What was it? Fair.
Yes.
The Grosvenor
Rooms.
Rooms.
Rose in Willesden.
Any special memories about that time?
I don't know, special
Well, actually,
memories.
I would say the most interesting part of my life was really before that, wasn't it? Until then, and then we started the ordinary life that most Jewish young couples.
Rosa has a different story completely to
We'll
mine.
start. We'll go back to your story, Rosa, if you may,
Yes.
later
Yes.
on. But we
From
continue
there.
now together. You're
Yes.
together, and you're married. And I'd like to hear about your married life, where you began on your own, what you did, how many children, if I may
Oh.
ask.
Well,
So you
when
married in
1937.
1937.
2 years before the war.
That's right, yes. And Rosa was a dress designer in a firm in Great Marlborough Street, and I was tailoring. That's when we first met. And then we married, and how long was it before Verna came?
5 years.
5 years, yes.
Where did you live during that time?
No, we bought a house.
We bought a house in Preston Road.
And then,
Preston Road.
and then what happens about? Did you then keep Shabbat? Or how
As
did
I
it-
say, there's quite a lot that you haven't heard,
Yes.
which has got to connect up, you
Yes.
see.
but-
Do you want to hear my side of
No,
the
wait a
story?
minute.
Well, I want.
What?
Yes, I would like to hear when you got married, and we'll come back to your
Yes.
beginnings.
Right.
When you got married, how did you celebrate the Yom Tovim and Shabbat?
Well, my parents were Orthodox as well. My father belonged to the is it Yeshurun Synagogue in Easton?
No, my
What's it
father
called?
was the...
Yeshurun, well, one of the very Orthodox ones, not the Ordinary United, a small synagogue just off Dollis Hill, and was we lived in Easton. I hated it. I just did not like it because there was a lot of noise and running around, the usual thing, and I didn't go because of that. But I belonged to Miss Montague's club, and I was a very, very keen member, Miss Lily. That started at the age of 15 as far as I was concerned. My mother had been a member of Lily Montague's club long before I was ever born.
My mother too.
Too.
They
Both
knew
of us.
each other.
So, although your mother belonged to the Lily Montague Club, did she not be persuaded to leave the Orthodoxy?
My father never left the
No, he
left the
didn't.
liberal,
No.
left
The
the
Orthodox.
Orthodox movement.
And I wasn't into it at all with Miss Lily, although I belonged to the club. I had very little to do with the religious side of it. When I left, I came from, well, as I say, I have to start from the
Yes, start from
beginning.
the beginning.
No, I'll start if I may.
Please.
Am I near enough to your...
Oh, sorry.
So sorry. My mother was German, born in Berlin, and the whole family were German, everybody. I had very clever cousins, and they were all, in fact, one of them was a professor in medicine. He died eventually in Israel, and there is a part of the Tel Shamir Hospital named after him. There's a whole, what do they call it? The Hella Foundation is my cousin.
Your single
Aaron.
name, Rosa.
My single name was Galonge.
Go on.
Again a story, Galonge. When my father came from Warsaw, my father was Polish. He couldn't write and he couldn't read, and when they asked him at the border what his name was, I believe, that's my opinion, I'm not sure, but his name must have been perhaps Galons, like the people. He said Galonge, perhaps that's how they said it, and they wrote down at the border his name Galonge, and that's how he remained.
So he came from Warsaw to Germany, to Berlin.
No, he came to England.
Oh, I see.
He came to England before he was married,
I
when
see.
he was 16.
And your mother was born in Berlin.
My father came also from a very religious family. His father, in fact, didn't work. He only doesn't. He had 6 sisters, and they had to work.
What did they do?
All kinds of things, whatever was going in Warsaw, near the ghetto. At that time there wasn't a real ghetto as such, but that's what I remember my father saying. And he was the youngest of the whole family, he just didn't like seeing his mother work as an unofficial midwife, and all the children, all girls, working, and his father used to stand in the corner and done from morning to night, and wanted his son to do the same. And when my father, he'd learnt to do uppers, as they're called, uppers on boots. And he had a cousin who also didn't like what he was doing. There was a union, and they put them into prison because somebody was making a lot of mischief in the workroom or something. And they eventually got out. They were sort of inveigled sort of thing. And they got out, and they decided they're going to leave the country. He didn't tell his father. He just ran away, literally, with his cousin, and came to England.
How old was he?
16 years old.
And your mother was in Berlin?
My mother, he didn't know at all. My mother was in Berlin, and they came to England, and they went back again. It was all things like that in the family. That I can't tell you exactly. I still have one aunt living. My mother's sister still lives, the youngest one. Also quite a big family. Now, I'm come back to my father. My father then at 16, I suppose like all boys, young fellows, he lived with a cousin at first and eventually lived on his own, and he did all kinds of things. He eventually became a machiner, as they called it, in the tailoring. Worked very hard, was a lovely young man. He was a little younger than my mother actually, 3 years younger. And I don't know where he met my mother, that's something I can't tell you, but he met my mother and eventually married.
Rosa, do you know anything about your father's education back home in Warsaw?
He did not learn anything. He only had a Yiddish education. He could read also Hebrew. He was always working. I can only remember seeing him work. I don't remember him doing anything else but work.
No hobbies, nothing like that.
Nothing like that at all. 1 year after
Other
they were
than
married.
synagogue?
Yes, synagogue was always the Orthodox synagogue. But of course I was very young still. 1 year after they were married, 1900.
Can we just go back to why your mother left Berlin?
My mother left Berlin because her father was a sheikhet, a big sheikhet in Berlin, and there'd been trouble in the family with one of the sons, and he was a bit ashamed of this son, and he brought the whole family over to England. In those days they could come over.
That's your mother's father?
My mother's father.
I see.
And he was a very religious man, and he lived in Peter Street in the West End, and he opened a little shop. Butcher shop. And from there my mother must have got married from
Rosa,
there.
do you
His
remember?
mother was my mother's mother rather. She died long before I was born. Don't ever remember anything about her. In fact, I'm called after her. She was an ailing woman towards the end. She'd had a lot of children. She'd had 13 children altogether. But out of those 13, I think 8 lived. And
This is your mother?
my mother's mother.
Mother's mother. Your
And
grandmother.
she was bedridden for a few years before she died.
This is in Berlin still?
No,
This
this
is
is already in
came.
England.
Oh, she came to England.
Yes,
I
the whole
see.
family
I
came
see.
to England. Except for one sister. One sister, the oldest sister, my mother's oldest sister, remained in Berlin, but she was already married.
Did you hear of any Jewish persecution in Berlin from before your father left? There was no reason of persecution. The reason he left was simply because of something with his son.
Well, no, he left because of his father.
I see, his father. But
In Poland. But in Germany there's always been anti-Semitism. Now, I was only a young child in Germany. I went to school for 6 years there, over 6 years, in Berlin.
your mother came over here
Yes.
before she got married.
Oh, yes.
And then, so why did she go back?
She didn't go back until we all went back.
That's what I mean. Why did she go back?
Well, first of all, there was the First World War. My father was not called up. He did volunteer. It didn't take him because he wasn't well enough. Something was wrong. Not a very big thing today, but in those days they didn't want to give a bed up, I suppose, for him to have an operation. Whichever way it was, he didn't go into the forces. And he remained in England, and we were sent to Bournemouth, Boscombe, I remember, as a little tiny girl. And I was there about a year. And then when the war was over, when the First World War was over, in 1919, my mother longed very much to see her sisters, who had gradually, one by one, gone back to Germany.
Why did they do that, Rosa? Did you know any reason?
Well, I don't know exactly why. The family fell apart when the mother died, and my aunt tells me these stories, the one who's still alive, that she being the youngest one, she was like a little bit wild. The father couldn't cope with them all. She eventually she did go back to Germany, and was even for the Second World War, she was married to an Angers. And she was living there during the whole of the German War. But she married a widow with children whom she had met in England before, while she was here. As far as I'm concerned, I don't remember my grandfather, although I was born already before he died. 2 years I was old when he died. And he died the night that my sister was born. My sister, she was not any longer. She was born on May the 2nd and he died on May the 1st. The same night, in the same house.
Where was the house?
They lived in...
Newport.
No, I was born in Newport Court. My sister, and when my father died, was in Cleveland Street. In Howard House.
And did they go to school on...
My grandfather, I don't know, I can't say.
Your father?
My father occasionally, very occasionally.
High days and holidays.
Mainly high days and holidays. They kept Shabbat. There was no very big ceremony about it, but always candles.
But did they go to work on Saturday at all?
If necessary, yes.
Did your father work occasionally on Saturdays?
Yes.
If necessary, yes.
The
yes.
tailors had to work when they had work.
My father had to work, and my mother had to work. My mother was a tailoress as well, eventually. She wasn't always a tailor. In Germany she wasn't. She was a sales lady in a big shop of their time. But that's I do remember her telling me about it. Then, of course, when, as I say, in England, as she was a single before she married my father, she belonged to the club. And when I became that same age, she said to me, you have got to belong to that club. But that was after I came back, of course. Now, when I went to Germany in 1919, because my mother longed to be back with her family. She first went there on a holiday, and I persuaded her to come back to Germany.
So, 1919, you were how old when you went there?
No, 6. I was born 1912, me getting 7. I remember going back, and we went to Berlin. My oldest aunt, was my mother's oldest sister, was a very wealthy woman, and she said, come to Berlin, and I will open a shop for you, and my father wasn't too well, as I say, and he won't have to work so hard and you have a better life, my mother. So with that, my mother went first, and we followed. My father followed with us too, and we went to Germany. And there we settled down as though we were in Germany. And we went through terrible times because Germans, like a country that has lost a war, we went through that same thing, you see. But I was always, personally, I was a lucky one because I had very good school education.
In Germany?
In Germany. I was in a first-class school. I was being educated in a very, very good school.
Was it a Jewish school?
No, it was a mixed school. But there was anti-Semitism. There was a lot of anti-Semitism.
From the teachers or from the other children?
No, not the teachers. My teachers were wonderful to me.
Just from the children?
Just from the children. We went to a Haida. My parents sent us to a Haida, and I remember hiding in the cellars when they were already started. Hitler was in the background already in 1923, unbelievable to other people. But he was around, he was writing his book already in prison, wasn't he? See? And there were a lot, and I remember things like, this is only just a small thing, but it was a big thing which stands out in my mind. There were 2 boys who lived in the same building. We had a tailor shop by that time. My father didn't like, we were in delicatessen at first. My father didn't like that, and then my aunt opened up a gentleman's tailoring shop for both my parents. And in that same house where that shop was, it was a big building, and in that building there were 2 boys. One was a communist, from a communist family, and one was from the, eventually those who became Nazis, Hitler Youth. And they were like scouts, we like to call it, and they'd go out hiking in the woods and streets and so on, and they'd always at each other, these 2 boys. And one particular day they went out, and there was a fight in the woods, and one of them got killed. And that was already, then I began to open my mind that how bad anti-Semitism really was there. But I was like a German girl. I was being brought up German. I forgot my English completely. And I only knew about being ein deutsches Fräulein. That's all I knew. And I wanted to be in the medicine. I wanted to learn medicine. I was aping my cousins, in short, all my cousins. They were all there then.
Was there a synagogue in Berlin at the time?
Oh, yes, lots of synagogues.
Yes, and
yes.
was it a big synagogue that you went
One
to?
particular synagogue, a very big one, we went to every Yom Tov. We went, all family would go there together.
This would be up till 19...
I came back in 1926, and there was no problem about travelling about or anybody running after us
Rosa, why
on the
did you
street.
leave? What about the shop, you remember?
Were you there?
Then my father hated Germany. He loathed it there because he couldn't speak German. He spoke with a very broken Yiddish accent German. And they used to say to him things like, gehen Sie zurück nach Galicia, and all kinds of things like that. And he knew that there was no good for us. And he kept coming back to England, and we went right through the inflation there. And the terrible.
Can you tell us any stories about
that? The inflation?
And anything that you saw with the anti-Semitism?
Yes.
Well, what can I say?
As I said, shop.
Well, yes, that was right at the very end, Harry. But we went through the inflation, and my father was in England.
Naturalised British subject.
See, being a British naturalised, yes, he was naturalised when he got married. Being British, he was able to travel there and back as often as he liked. And he would go to England to earn money, because he couldn't earn money in Germany during inflation. Of course, it was impossible to earn money at all. And he'd sent us money, English money, and it got to the stage in Germany where German money was not accepted. They only wanted dollars and pounds. So our pounds were marvellous. And my mother was able to buy a beautiful home with that. She had lovely furniture and things, which was our luck. Because after that we had a little bit of money that way. And
this is from the tailoring here that he earned the money.
yes, in England, and he'd come either send the money or come back every now and again and give her the money. But of course it was no life for them. My father was here, my mother was there. But that's true, he didn't like it. Then eventually it got so bad, after inflation was over, then we went down with all the Germans, in short, right down. And there was a lot of jealousy because we had had everything we needed during that inflation period, as we had money, you see. So then my father said, I'm not staying here. You are either going to come back to England with me or I'm leaving you. I didn't want to leave us, but he just gave
An
an
ultimatum.
And of course my mother said, all right, we're going back to England.
Rosa,
Because all us sisters...
what was the last straw? What was written on your shop?
Right. The last straw was, we had this tailoring shop with 2 windows. And those 2 windows, we came out, we got up in the morning, and when we came outside, the whole of those 2 windows were plastered up with Hier leben Juden, raus mit die alle Juden, dreckige Juden, all things like that. And great big, and, you know, Mugendowitz and...
Not Mugendowitz.
Yes,
Mugendowitz.
swastika as well, both, all these things mixed up, you know. You couldn't see through the window, and my mother said, Dad's right, we're going back. She didn't want to, but she had to.
Before that, when you were going to school, you said that the teachers were good to you, but the children were anti-Semitic. In what way were the children anti-Semitic?
Well, they said
How
now
did
and
it
again,
manifest?
Olayud. I didn't quite understand what they really
I
meant
see, you
by
didn't
it.
know.
I went to a Haida, and I was only 13 when I came back, and my mind was more... I went to a very good school where there were a nice class of people, nice children. My sister didn't come to the same school with me. She did at the beginning, but my parents couldn't afford to keep both of us there. And eventually, the school kept me there without us paying because my mother wanted to take both of us out, but she just couldn't afford it. And they said, no, Rosa, she's a good scholar, she'll stay, but your young one we can take out. So we went to different schools. What happened with her and her school she went in, I can't tell you. But with the school that I went to, I didn't find a lot of that. There were nice types of people there, and I didn't have any problems as a child, really, myself personally, except when we came from the Haida, we were chased occasionally and we would go and hide, like children do, from them. And I've heard even shooting down the street when we were down in the Haida and so on. But that was the last straw. My mother then had no money left, but she did have her home, which she was able to sell sufficiently, get sufficient money from the home to take us back to England, in short, for our fare. And she managed to bring her linen and some china.
On the boat?
On the boat to come back, yes, by boat, a train by boat. And I remember coming through Cologne and crying my heart out because I thought that I was coming to England where there were no trees. Stupid. There you are, that's what a child's mind's like. Although I was 13 and brought up the way I was.
Did you have any childhood sweethearts in school that you didn't want to leave?
Well, not exactly sweethearts. I think I was perhaps rather young, not really sweethearts, but I had girlfriends who I was very fond of, and I couldn't believe I was never going to see them again, or hardly didn't think.
Jewish girlfriends?
Yes, they lived down the same street.
What did you do in Germany in those days for your hobbies?
Well,
your parents?
you know, in those days, the children went everywhere with their parents. I mean, we didn't go very far. We had sledges in the winters with the snow. We used to go to the parks. I used to have skates. I never had dolls. My parents couldn't afford to buy me dolls, and my oldest aunt had a very large wholesale stationery shop it was an upstairs, I remember, where they had books, if they sold books, school
And you were
books.
able to read?
And this cousin of mine, this doctor, who eventually was a professor, he used to let me play around his feet, so to speak, while he studied and so on, and I had availability of all his books, anything I wanted. And my aunt always gave me books during that period to read as a present. Literature, everything, yes. But of course it was all lost when I came to England. It was all worth nothing.
So you came to England at 13.
And then my mother said, right, we're going back. So we went back to nothing. We came back, we had no home.
Where did you come to?
That's it, we had no home. We came to some friends.
Quinta.
No, not Quintner.
With some friends. You came to...
Where?
I'm trying to think what the place is called now. Up the hill where...
Clerkenwell somewhere, wasn't it? Pentonville Road.
Pentonville Road, that's right, that way. And we went. They had a house there, and we went into there. We were there about a month or so. And my father walked around looking for rooms as they were in those days.
May I interrupt? In those days, you could go from one room to one place to another. There was no difficulty, no great difficulty in finding accommodation.
No, it was renting you were.
Yes, rented, of course. We had no
Tenement
money, we had
buildings.
nothing. And my father was walking down the street and met an old colleague of his who'd worked with. And he said, "Hello, Sam, what are you doing?" His name was Samuel. And he said, "I've come with the whole family back in England now." That was after 6 years, you see. And he says, "I'm looking for somewhere for us to live." So he said, "Well, I was going to move from Howland Street, where he was living, where he had been living, into Warren Street." He says, "We have a home. You haven't got it. You take it." So with that, we moved into Warren Street,
Where I was.
where we moved into the same house where my husband was living. But, as I say, I couldn't speak English, and I was a proper German girl. I used to do kleines Knickschen, that means a little curtsy, and all the things, that little German girls did. And I was very strange. I felt very out of it because I didn't know anybody.
Did you go
here.
back to school here?
Yes, then it was summertime, it was July, and then when the school started in September, like it always does, I went to the Jewish preschool in Hanway Place, is it called?
Off Tottenham Court
Off Tottenham
Road.
Court Road, Hanway Place. I went there for 9 months. And in that 9 months, of course, I picked up a few words, and slowly, as a child does, everything around me was English. The words must obviously been in the back of my head, because if I went there when I was 6 and a half, I must have been able to speak English already. And I had been to school in England before I went there. I went also to the same school as where Harry went to, which was Upper Marylebone Street in those days. Then. And I lived in Savile Street, that's all before I went to Germany. And when I came back, as I said, I came back. Then I went to work. At 14, I left. And what to do, because my English wasn't not worth anything, my German certainly wasn't anything for then. And so I could sew, I was quite good at sewing, and I went into dressmaking. My father took me up to a place. I didn't like it, I went from one place to the other, till eventually I settled down off Bond Street in a couture house, where I worked for 2 years, and I was...
What was the name?
Loveridge. It was just off Bond Street. I was very much liked there, and I was a good worker, and we did work entirely different to the way we work today, of course.
Rosa, can I ask you, dear, today if they make you work from 9 till 5, it's a lot. What hours did you do as a child?
I worked from 8 to 6.
And Saturday mornings. Can I ask you a very intimate question, what you got at 14?
Yes, I got 10 shillings, which was very high wages.
When we married, I was earning £5 a week.
At what age was that?
So I was 26.
£5 a week. That wasn't bad. That wasn't bad.
I was
Rosa
earning
at £12 a week.
So how did you come to...
Ah, that's another story.
Now, you see, my story is really quite extraordinary, really. I came up against anti-Semitism in England.
In the couture place?
No. My sister, when she was 14, wanted to come and work also in dressmaking, but she wasn't very good with her hands, not like me. I mean, 2 children are often different, aren't they? But my mother said, you take her where you are. Wherever I went when I was young, I had to always take my sister. Here it started again. The girls went on strike because every apprentice as we were then, I wasn't an apprentice, I was an improver by that time, but when she came in, she was an apprentice, had 6 shillings. And I got 10 shillings. And she wanted 10 shillings. And everybody went on strike because they said she wasn't worth 10 shillings, she should have 6 shillings. And my sister wanted 10, so they sacked her. By sacking her, I had to leave. So at 16, I had no job. I started wandering the street, and I did find eventually a job. I remember in Walmer House, I can't remember the name of the people.
Registrar Street?
In Regent Street, Walmer House.
Oh,
Regent
Regent
Street.
I know, yes.
I went there, and I worked for a Spanish lady. I worked there 6 months, and I was an improver by that time. My sister was somewhere else, I couldn't tell you where. She worked for somebody else. I worked up there, and one day she called me into her workroom, into her office, and said to me, Rosa, I want to ask you a question. I said, yes. She says, are you Jewish? And I said, yes. Why? She says, I don't employ Jews.
And she was
And
Spanish?
she sacked me.
She was Spanish.
She was Spanish. And she sacked me. I was an improver and worked with what they used to call in those days a hand, because in the couture work it was also divided up, and that's how you learnt. And this girl, Nora...
Did you ask her why she didn't enjoy Jewish?
No, I didn't ask her any questions. I just went. I was upset, in short.
Of course.
Went to Miss Lily, told her this, and she said, don't worry, we'll soon find a job for you. But nobody could. There was busy slack, as my husband said. And I then started... Nora left with me. Nora was this improver who was a non-Jewish girl. She said, if they can sack a girl with golden hands like yours, those are the words she said, I'm not staying there either.
She's with the Spanish people.
Yes, with the Spanish people. She was non-Jewish, this girl, Nora. But she was a much older girl. She was about 22, 23, and she was engaged. Anyway, she came with me, and we started walking the street looking for jobs, looking at all the bills everywhere and so on. And eventually I saw in Great Portland Street a place where it said outdoor workers wanted. And I didn't know what an outdoor worker was. And I went home to my mother, and I said, Mum, my mother also worked, and I said to her, tell me what an outdoor worker is. She said, I don't know. It sounds to me like somebody who works at home. Go up and see. She says, look, what can they say to you? Don't be frightened.
Your mother said go up and see, yes?
Which I did. And they gave me a woolen dress, which I'd never made in my life. We made silk chiffons and so on for the royalty, for the elite. And I took this dress, and they gave me a piece of material. I thought I was going to get a cut bundle. I didn't. I got a piece of material. It was check, I remember. I brought it home and stood looking at it and thinking to myself, well, am I going to cut this up? I showed it to my mother, and she took this table, covered it over with a blanket, gave me newspaper, and she says, have a go. They can't do anything to you. So I took this newspaper, stuck it all together, and some red pencil, because you can't see black on it, and I slowly made a pattern of this dress. And that was the first time I ever cut a dress or pattern and dress in my life.
Without any training?
Without any training. And eventually I suddenly saw I could do these things and knew what to do. I didn't take the dress apart. I took the dress back after Maggie cut it. My mother stood with her hands on her head watching me cut into this material. Took the dress back, and I had bundles and bundles of work. Nora, of course, was with me. I had one machine in the house anyway, as we were all in the tailoring. And I started sewing these dresses, and it wasn't good enough because there was only, how many could we make, just the chairs? So we cleared our bedroom, which I had upstairs, out, my sister and my bedroom. We slept on a sofa, and it wasn't more than a year, and I had 6 machines up there, and 12 girls employed.
Jewish girls?
Oh, no, mixed.
Some Jewish?
Yes, some Jewish, mostly Jewish, but mixed.
How old were you?
I was still 16. And by the time I was 17, I was really a boss. And Nora didn't want to stay with me because I worked too hard. I worked day and night, until Saturdays, Sundays, and any time I had off, I went to Miss Lily's club. That's the only place I went to.
How much do you think you earned during that period?
I earned a lot of money. There were times when I had £100 in those days a week. And I was able to give my mother and father money to buy a house, a deposit on a house. And my parents then moved out of Warren Street, which was being pulled down, as Harry said. And we were already beginning. It was horrible, all dust and dirt and so on. And we bought a house in Easton. And then
What about your workshop?
My workshop then went, and I had a workshop in Percy Street. We took a room there. And of course I worked for more than one firm then. But again, slack time started. I suddenly had slack time, and I didn't have sufficient work to have all the people working there. My sister, of course, worked for me, and I was getting a little upset over not having a good time like other young girls were. And I said to my mother, I would like very much to pack this up and go out to work as a dress designer, where I worked regular hours and could come home and go out like other girls do. By that time I was over 18. And she said, all right, if you think you can, try and find a job first. I found a job in a newspaper, which was in Newman Street, I went up there and I said, I'm a dress designer. I just took a chance. Never been.
Remember the company?
No, I can't remember the name. That I can't remember. I worked there about a year as a dress designer. I wasn't very happy, but I earned nice money. I can't remember exactly how much it was. It wasn't £12. £12
This would have been what year was that?
Well, I was about 19.
Yes, so
19.
And you were born in
1912. 12, yes. And then
31.
I saw in the newspaper of another firm that was looking for a dress design. By that time I was quite qualified. I really knew what I was doing.
But that's still without having any
No
schooling.
training whatsoever. Schooling?
I mean, in the way of pattern design.
No, none.
You didn't go to evening classes?
None whatsoever. It was all natural. Learned it from working on it, sewing on it. I had done woolen dresses, I'd done all kinds of things which I'd never done before, which I just did, and that's all there was to it. But of course my amusement was with Miss Lily. We went hiking. At the age of 16 I went away on a club holiday. I went on 5 club holidays actually.
Where did they go in those days?
Well, they went to lots of places. I went to Bognor.
When you went, where did you stay? Under
We went
campus?
to schools. We went into big schools which were on holiday at the
I
time,
see.
and we went in, and Miss Lily even came with us. Twice I was with Miss
And Miss
Lily.
Marion.
And Miss Marion. And Miss Levy,
How
Nellie
many
Levy.
girls came?
Well, there was a senior crowd and a junior crowd. At first I went with the junior crowd, which over 21 was afterwards the senior crowd.
All girls.
All girls, no boys. But if anybody was engaged to be married, they were allowed to have them down there, say for a weekend or something like that, and see them, say hello and so on. But we all went out
And what did you do during the day?
on holiday. Well, we used to visit lovely places. We used to go all around England, see different homes and different gardens. We swam. We had gyms. We made a lovely Friday night. Miss Lily or Miss Levy, depending on who was with us, would make a beauty. That was one of the conditions Miss Lily made, that we were not allowed out on Saturday mornings. We had to attend a service which she made, and Friday night was also a service.
This was liberals.
Liberal. But it still didn't sink in. I mean, I just went along with it, you see.
Was that conducted in English?
Mainly.
Mainly.
In English, but she explained everything, Miss Lily, and I was quite one of her favourite girls there.
You liked her?
I liked her very much, and we used to be very, very good together. I've got photographs of her even now.
I've got 8 albums full of pictures going back to when my father first came over from Russia.
I would like, if it were possible, to have some copies of the photographs, if somebody could come along and get copies. Would you allow us to do that?
Yes, but you'd have to go through 8 albums to see which
Well,
ones you wanted.
No, yes.
There might be some very interesting
Well,
ones.
there are
Those
some
fa-
interesting
I would
Harry,
be
not
fa-
all the 8 albums are from the olden
No,
days.
no,
No,
no.
so-
A lot of them are.
And yet 1 or 2 pictures of you with
With Miss Lily, yes, I
would
can show you
like
that. With Miss
very
Lily,
much.
Miss Marion, Miss Levy.
Yes.
My daughter, when she presented her at her 80th, I think it was her 80th or 70th birthday, when we were at, we had My Club and I that she wrote, My Club and I, the book. We had a big thing. Yes, we had a play.
We're
We had a
ju-
play
we're
at the
jumping the
start.
gun.
Yes, we're jumping the gun. Yes.
Let's go back to
Right.
when you,
So then, as I
you
said,
worked as a designer.
as a designer. Then eventually I found a job by the name was Perlmutt in Poland Street.
Oh,
and
I know
worked-
Perlmutt.
Perlmutt, yes.
I know Mr.
Mr. and Mrs. Perlmutt, they're
They
not
live in
alive
Mowbray.
anymore, surely.
Oh, well, I know the
They
Perlmutt
went
is
to
in
Israel.
in Mowbray Road in Edinburgh.
Maybe they're children then,
Oh, maybe,
but
yes. Yeah, 'cause they also
they
do
were
business.
they were much older than me then.
Oh, well then.
No, and Mrs. Perlmutt then took me to Paris, and I started going to Paris with her.
What,
I
to
was
the
there.
Pret-a-Porter?
Huh?
To the Pret? To the Pret-a-Porter?
Yeah, no, there was no Pret-a-Porter. In
In
those
those
days I used to go to the big houses, to Balmain, to Dior.
Want to look at these
Yes,
collections?
all the
Collections.
collections I used to go with, and I was all dressed
To
up.
take
and-
sketches?
Yes, I used to sketch. I used to have to sketch in a little cafe next door, quickly in a little book,
Yes,
and then
yes.
go back to my bedroom with her, and she'd lie on the bed while I did all the big sketches, you know, that kind of thing, then come back and we'd make our collection, you see. But I mean, by that time, as I say, I was very, very well away. I mean, I was about 19 to getting up to 20. And we had a manageress in our firm who was very anti-Semitic, although she worked and had a wonderful job there, but she hated me for some reason. I think she was jealous because I used to go to Paris and quite a fuss was made of me. And she made my life a little bit of a misery.
What did she do? She was a manageress of the workshop?
She was a manageress of the firm, if you'd like to call it that. Was she manageress of the sales side?
I
More
see.
to do with the sales side. But she came in, used to say things, you know, and walk out and fling the door and all that. Like, you know, I'd take offence. And I said to my mother, I was single at the time, I said, I am going to find another job. And it so happened that just underneath us, in Poland Street, in the same house, a building, somebody was looking there by the name of Phyllis Taylor, who was looking for a dress designer. And I went down there, and I told her that I was working upstairs, and I was a bit nervous about the whole thing, because it's not very nice to go from upstairs to downstairs, and you know, when people know each other. Don't worry, she said, we are having a place built where the fire station is in Great Marlborough Street. She says, and you'll come down here, and you'll only be here no more than 2 weeks. She says, and then we'll go over there. So I left her, and very, very upset, of course, and I said I couldn't stay with Molly, her name was. I didn't want to stay with Molly any longer. She begged me, but no, I won't. And I went over to Phyllis Taylor, and there I was 10 years with her.
That's
Of course,
fantastic.
then, by that time, we were getting near the war, and well, I was getting married as well. I was getting
You
Harry.
met Harry by
And
then.
I'd met Harry. I know I was going with another boy first. I went with him nearly a couple of years, and decided he wasn't the one for me. And when I met Harry, I started going out with him, and then we married.
At the dance hall, yes?
No, not the dance. That was a long time after the dance hall. No, we just met, as I say, in the house, as Harry
Oh,
said. in the
early,
house.
yes. And then
In the house. And then we started going out with each other more regularly, and the parents, of course, knew each other from there, and everybody was happy, and we got married. But then
And what shul was it you said you got
we got married in Raleigh Close,
Raleigh Close,
Orthodox,
yes.
Orthodox synagogue. We didn't belong to anything. Harry, of course, belonged to Hendon, but we moved to Preston Road. And they were building houses
Your
then.
mother moved?
No, my mother remained there. Harry and
Oh,
I.
I see.
Harry and I had.
What made you...
Harry didn't want to live near my mother, and I didn't want to live near his mother, so we found something in between. And my mother happened to find out, my mother was interested, she went out and found that they were building off Preston Road up on the Costin estate in Trevelyan Crescent, actually. And so Harry came up there with me, and we could afford, at that time, to buy £100 down for a house.
£110
down.
This is, what year was this now?
37.
Well, we married actually now. That's 1936. 1936. And so we put this deposit down, so our house go up. We actually had it built.
It was £1,100.
And a very nice house at that. And we still didn't belong to any
Is that
synagogue.
a detached house or semi-detached?
Semi-detached.
3 bedrooms?
3 bedroom, very nice house. £100
When you
of
were,
extras
can
in
I
it.
just go back 1 minute when you were living in Percy Street? Did you have an indoor bathroom?
Well, in Warren Street.
In Warren
Warren
Street,
Street,
yes,
did you have-
We had the indoor,
There
but
was
we
a
had
bathroom right on the top floor.
You did have an indoor bathroom.
I had.
And
My parents had a
Yes,
bathroom.
and
So how
we
did
had
you-
to pay Rosa's mother for us to have a bath.
Oh, I see.
That was the
There was
only-
one bathroom and you used the whole family. I'm sorry, I should have asked
Two
you that.
families
Two
used the one
families.
Two
bath.
families used the one bath.
Right.
And what about kitchens? You both had separate kitchens?
Oh,
yes.
yes.
Okay.
And
Well,
our
we lived in the basement and the first floor, and Rosa's family
basement, for ground floor and
first floor, and Rosa had the second floor
Second and
and
the
top
third
floor.
floor.
And that's where the bath was.
That's
That's
where the
on the
bath
third
was.
floor.
I
And
see.
we had 3 rooms altogether there. And one was a bathroom and one was a bedroom. Two girls originally had ours, it became a workroom. And my parents had a big bedroom, come sitting room, and the kitchen. Kitchen, the sofa was in there. That's where we eventually slept, my sister and I. But from there we've moved
Yes,
on a long
sorry,
way,
I
haven't
meant
we?
to ask about
Yes.
the
But
sanitation.
anyway, the point is that we had a house built then in Preston Road, and I earned very nice money, and we
You travelled
bought a
to
lot
London?
of furniture. We bought a lot of furniture on paying off
Yes.
because I had to pay for my own wedding because my parents couldn't afford to pay for a wedding.
Your father was still alive in those
Oh
days?
yes, my father died in 1947. Quite young, but still he did die. And as I earned nice money, so I decided I wouldn't have any children until, at least I didn't want any children. It wasn't like today, but I didn't want any children until we paid our furniture off. But war broke out in the middle of it all. So here I was with a very good job. They begged me to remain there. I had no children, and in those days they used to call people up if they had no children. What to do? So governor, whose wife had 3 children, she went away to Bermuda, and he made an application for me that he wanted to keep me so badly that he had to let 14 girls go out of the firm for me, to keep me.
From the government?
Yes, from the government.
They had to work on munitions.
I see.
They all had to work on war work, and I wasn't on war work.
How many people worked in that place?
Oh, a very big place it was. It was a fire station originally, and it became a very, very big firm. Had men there as well eventually.
Do you know how many people worked?
100.
See?
And were you the only
men.
Were you the only designer?
No, I was the only designer for dresses, for the dresses. But there was a brother-in-law who did tailoring, the men's side, not men's, women's costumes, but
yeah.
he did, and then he went into the forces. But slowly, lots of them were called up as we went along, and of course it didn't empty itself out exactly, but I would say half itself, quite half itself. Meanwhile, in 1942, Harry went into the forces, and I started having a baby.
Well, can I interrupt here? I worked in a firm that were making RAF uniforms, ordinary cheap uniforms, and that kept me back for a while. But eventually, can I interrupt here?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Eventually, this firm closed down, and I was called up. I still have an album here with all my call-up papers and everything that started from the beginning. And I remember going and having a medical examination in Acton. I was A1, and I had to fill out a form. An officer was sitting at a desk with me, and one of the questions was, this is prior to going into the forces, one of the questions was, country of origin of parents. And I put Russia. And the officer looked at this, he said, Russia. And at that time, Germany had made a non-aggression pact with Russia. So therefore, although my father had served in the British Army in World War I and was a naturalised British subject, and I was born in Britain, I was still under some sort of cloud, and they wouldn't accept me into the British forces. Although the officer said, put down in brackets, father naturalised, served in British Army, and you were born in Britain. They still wouldn't accept me. And they drafted me to work on the land drainage camp in Buckinghamshire. I worked there for a little while until I got an injury on my finger. It was hedging and ditching and draining the River Ouse for an agricultural scheme. And they sent me back back home. I had a little operation here on my finger, and eventually Germany invaded Russia, and within 2 months I was in the Air Force.
And I was pregnant at the time. I mean, once I started having a child, I wanted to go through with it, although I never wanted them during the wars. I slept in tubes, slept in the ground, slept in a tube. I did all the things that everybody else had to do.
From the tube to work?
From the tube to work, every day. I used to go wander around sometimes in Oxford Street with my ankles deep in glass, where everything was falling. My boss was in Bermuda with her 3 children. Her husband was here in England, keeping the business going, and because I was very, very important to them. And I was earning quite a nice wage, and I wanted my home to remain intact, because I knew Harry was going in. Then I started having a baby, and Harry used to come home, you see, because he was stationed mainly in Wales.
I was in South Wales.
And he used to come home practically every weekend, and as I say, I started having a baby, and I went through with it. And I had to take on another dress designer in that same firm to take my place until I felt I could come back. And I did go back, and then it wasn't long after that I fell pregnant again, and I had a second child, and then I couldn't go back anymore. It was too much.
Anthony, my
son,
he was
the second child.
The second child. The girl's first. She's 45 now, and he's 43.
And in the meantime, what did you do in the way during the war? Did you practice Judaism in any way, other than just go to young?
Well, I still went, funny enough, to the club, although I was married, and although I had children, I went along to the club because during one of the periods that I went on summer holidays, Miss Lily heard me singing on a swing with somebody by the name of Gertie Salon, who today is I don't know if she's alive, I think she is, but she's in Israel, and she was quite a famous singer as well eventually. And she heard us two singing, and she said, you two join the operatic society which we have in the club. She said, you both can sing. And we were taken on. Out of 10 girls, we were the only two who were taken on. And from that day on, I have never left singing. I sing till this very day. And that was my amusement. Even when I was married, and even during the war, we used to do all kinds of different things. The club was still there, but until it was bombed. And in 1940, 41...
Where was the club?
The club
In
was Alfred
Place.
Place.
But
Alfred
the bomb
Place.
right on the
A
club.
bomb, it had a direct hit. I wasn't in the club at the time, fortunately, but there were 29 girls killed.
So when you had your son,
And then I had my son,
D-Day +1.
yes,
Anthony was born.
and Harry was still in
I was still in-
Wales,
I'm still
but
in
he was
Wales.
drafted.
But I was drafted to Okinawa.
But that was after, wait a moment. Then, prior to that, the German war was nearly over. We could see we were winning. And I said, Harry, we've got to do something now about our living.
Rosa,
We're
can
going
I just ask you something? You were English and you were married here in England, but your background was German. Did you have any feelings about, were you sorry about what was happening to the Germans, the bombing that was going on? How did you feel about that? Did you feel in
Didn't
any
think
way...
too much about it. We
You-
just
you
knew that
felt
we
English?
yes, very,
I
very
see.
self-preservation.
You-
I knew that my oldest aunt had got out. Most of them had got out before the war. This is the point.
So you didn't feel as though you were
No,
part of Germany?
my oldest aunt had gone to Israel because the cousin, that one which was the professor, he went in 1935. He came to England first. Some of his colleagues in the hospital, where he was a very big man in the hospital there, one of the hospitals, said, get out before they throw you out or make you go. So he got out, he came to England, and I remember him learning you couldn't go with it unless you had an English degree, you can't practice anywhere. So he came to my parents, where we were living in Easton, and he was with us for about 6 months, and then he went up to Edinburgh University, and there he learnt whatever he had to pass, whatever he had to go through. And from there he went on to Israel. And then he took his brother, who also came to England, and he went over to Israel, and his parents. So they were out. The others, they had the other sisters, which were still there. This is before the war now. They were still all of them there. Another sister had 3 children. All the 3 were born here. They were married here, but went back to Germany with the 3 children, and in the same position as I was in, they were able to come back.
So during the war you didn't feel as though you were German? You
Not
felt
at all.
English.
Not at
And
all.
you didn't feel, and no one, because you didn't have a German accent, so no one knew that you were...
Very
that
few,
you-
very few knew that I'd even been in Germany,
Germany, right.
except my name Gallange, everybody thought it was French. It wasn't
Gallange.
at all, but I mean, I played on that really, so
Yeah.
it was very good for my
Yes,
particular trade. And
So you,
no,
left, so you left work after your son was born.
I left
Did you have
work
a
and we
Bresnila?
started a little business.
Did you have a Bresnila for him? Did you have a bris?
Yes, of
Yes.
course.
In the shawl?
Everything,
Yes.
everything as it should be. Oh yes,
Bar mitzvah.
bar mitzvah.
He was bar mitzvah where?
Yes, now that's a story.
He's
Now,
bar mitzvah in Whitfield
Whittle
Street.
Street, in the Liberal
The
synagogue.
Liberal synagogue.
Ah,
He
now
was the-
how?
Ah,
How?
Well, when we
He-
lived in Preston Road, we were approached one day by
Mr. Salter.
a Mr. Salter.
We
How-
lived in the same streets.
From where? Why?
When
Why
he
did-
was living in the vicinity.
Yes.
Wait a moment, why? The lady's asking why. Now, he had
Amore,
heard...
not a lady, Amore.
More. He had heard that I had been a West Central Girls Club, that I was a Central Girls Club, because I stayed there for 28 years altogether. And he had heard, he said, I understand you are a Lily Montague girl. I said, yes, I am. He said, would you be interested in a liberal synagogue here? Now, my husband didn't belong to any synagogue in those days, because it was the war, and we weren't worried about anything. We were only worried really about our livelihood and about getting through the war. And here I was with 2 babies, one thing or the other. And this was, Anthony was by that time about 3, wasn't he? About 4. You'd come back from the war. And Mr. Salter came to me and he said, would you be interested? I said, yes, we would be. But where? He said, well, in the vicinity. He says, I know there are quite a few people who are interested in the Liberal Synagogue. Wondered if you would be. I said, well, we don't belong to anything, but we don't know anything about it. He said, would you like to come along to the hall? There was a church hall in East Lane, Wembley. Dr. Rayner, as he is now, was taking a service, and would we like to come along and hear it? So we went,
And we joined.
and we liked it, and we were really founder members of Wembley Liberal Synagogue.
That's how you became liberal.
That's how
We
we
did.
became liberals, see? We liked everything about it. First of all, because
Rosa sang in their choir for
I
how
sang
long?
for 33 years. I was in their choir.
You never went back after the children grew up to the designing?
Oh, well, I had no business.
we
Oh,
had a
you started a
business.
business in dress.
In
When I came out of the forces.
Before
I see.
he came out of the forces, we talked about it, and we took premises in Maddox Street, 54 Maddox Street.
I know it well.
Yes. And Chappells eventually took it over, but anyway, 54 Maddox Street, and it was bomb damaged. It hadn't been bombed, but it was damaged from blasting somewhere.
I got the factory ready.
We got
I was
it
still
all
in the
going.
forces. I used to do it over on
Weekends,
48
and a brother-in-law
passes. My
helped.
brother-in-law. We got the factory together. How many machines did we have?
12
12
six
machines.
each side.
And I never saw
Second-hand
I
machines.
never saw the machines turn.
What, Wilcox and Gibbs?
Yes, Wilcox and Gibbs machines.
On the day that Rosa opened there, I was drafted to Okinawa in the Pacific. The war with Germany had finished, and I was an engine fitter in the RAF. I was 4 years in the RAF. And they wanted 500 different specialists on different types of aircraft and the ancillary equipment to help the Americans on the onslaught onto Japan. And I was one of them. They sent us up to Lincolnshire for a 5-week toughening up course under canvas in November. Tents, field kitchens, very, very rough. Mines, booby traps, unarmed combat, all that sort of thing, you know. And fortunately, while I was still at that camp,
Well, unfortunately, I'm sure you like to look at it.
they dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki,
If it saved a few thousand lives, it's fortunate.
and there was no war.
It would have gone on.
But they
The
still
war.
sent him away.
They said, of course, when you leave a camp, others take your place. So we had 500 men in a place called Strubby. It's not even on the map. It was an old American aerodrome.
No, it will actually. It's a war afterwards.
And they sent me to India. There was no war on.
And I was left with a business and
And
two
Rosa was
babies.
left with a
Why
business.
India?
Well,
To
they
get them
couldn't
out of the
send me
way.
back to the camp. Couldn't send me back to my old camp because
In Wales.
in Wales, in South Wales, I was in the maintenance unit there.
But if it's over, why didn't they demob you?
Because
Well,
he
you
was
were
one of the
demobbed by
older ones.
numbers.
Oh, I see.
You were demobbed by numbers. I was group 34. And that took about 9 months before 34 came round, and I was demobbed in
I
India.
didn't know what to do with all the men. They were all coming back. All the younger ones were
the
coming
men were
back.
coming back from the Far East, so I was drafted to from maintenance command. I'd been on maintenance command to bomber command to transport command to Southeast Asia command. I'd been on 4 different commands, and at that time I was in India where they were ferrying the troops back from the Far East. I was on a station there that worked on the aircraft that put down at my station, a place called Moripur, near Karachi. And we serviced the aircraft that flying troops out to different places in the Far East and bringing back the veterans back to England, according to group number.
So this is 1945.
1945.
And you're in the factory in Maddox
And I'm in
Street
Maddox
on your
Street,
own with
and
the
I
two
never even
children.
saw the wheels turning.
Was your mother alive to look after the children?
My mother was alive, but she couldn't look after the children because she had my sister living with her.
We
and
had
there
a
were two
housekeeper.
other children.
You had a house.
I managed to get a girl who I had lots of trouble, as you could imagine. First of all, before I even got a girl, I managed to get a lady across the road, a Jewish woman who wasn't working. She was older than me. I don't know if she's alive today. She looked after the children for one day, and my neighbour next door who had adopted a child, she looked after the children for one day while I ran up and down to this factory, to this firm of mine. And I managed to keep going, and I had it very, very hard. I had no money. I didn't know which way to go about. I had no time either. I couldn't get any help from my parents because my parents weren't business people. They didn't understand. My father wasn't very well at the time. Excuse me. Of which he eventually did die. He had heart trouble. And until my husband came back, nothing straightened itself out. I really was in dead trouble, you know, with 2 children.
When
but
I
I
came
managed.
back, we raised money in the bank, money to the bank.
We had a house, of course.
We had a
so
house
we
as
didn't realise
collateral.
the house would be worth something.
We had a house as collateral, and
So from there we progressed.
How did you...
For 6 years we went on, and then somebody
Lily,
approached me.
Sorry, Rosa. How was it you making designing dresses and selling?
Designing-
and doing it as an outdoor
I
worker?
couldn't, as an outdoor worker,
As an outdoor worker.
I did something very foolish. When I started the business, I should have immediately applied for a coupon float,
yes.
which I didn't, thinking I'd wait till he came back. And when he came back and I applied, the man, one of these little officials, turned round to me and said, "You be pleased your husband came back. He wouldn't give me a coupon float." So we had to remain outdoor workers. And it was very hard going because to a big staff, all responsibility, designing, and we didn't have a lot of money for it. One day I met the traveller from Phyllis Taylor, where I'd been working. He said to him, "What are you doing?" He'd been a captain in the forces during the war, and he was back with Phyllis Taylor. And he said, "What are you doing, Rose?" And I told him. He says to me, "I'm going to start up with you. I've always said I'm going to start up with you. I'll start up with you." I said, "How?" He said, "I'm tired myself, but I know somebody." And he brought in...
Don't mention names.
Why not?
No, you don't have to.
It's you.
You don't have to mention
Don't
names.
worry.
Don't worry. He brought in somebody that he knew, and two people actually, who put money in, but they expected too much, too quickly. They didn't let it grow. Because
They wanted more out of it than the business could do.
was able. They wanted immediately money to flow, but it didn't. I mean, it
You've
took
got to work
time,
the business up.
right? And we had a lot of trouble with these people, and eventually we closed it down. At least it come to an end, and Harry and I thought, that's it, we finished. And I went out to work again, and he went to work. Different places, both of us. And we were both all right. I was all right. At first it took a few years, didn't it? A couple of years, but we eventually worked our way up again. And
You worked as a designer again?
as a designer again for some people named Jacobs. They're both not alive today anymore. In Wells Street. And I was 6 years with her. Of course, in between that, I was always going to Paris. After the war, particularly after the war, I went twice, two, 3 times a year. I'd go to Paris, collections and all that and so on. And I had a very interesting life.
Rosa, when you were a designer, did you select the cloths?
Did I what?
Select the cloths to use? Or
Yeah,
did you have
everything.
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 You had to select.
I had to select the cloths, I had to design the dress, I had to cut the pattern, or I showed the girls eventually how to, I had my own
Grade.
cutters, grading, everything. Eventually Harry came into it, and he took over dresses on a cheaper line.
And
I did couture evening wear.
I'd never had a pattern cutting lesson in my life.
But he's very
Rosa,
good with his
I can't
hands.
design for toffee apples, but I can copy. And Rosa used to give me a sketch, and I used to make it a pattern.
I see.
There were cheaper dresses. We had 2 sections, Rosa's section and my section. By then, we'd met another man who'd set us up again, and we had a factory in
Cleveland
Street of
Middlesex
3,500
House.
square
Yeah,
feet.
I know Middlesex.
3,500 square feet. We had 50 girls there.
As outdoor workers?
No, we were
By
manufacturing.
that time we were manufacturing and selling.
Under your own label?
Yes, we were
Yes,
Rosa
we had
Ross.
Rosa
Ross.
And by
And-
that time the children were
By that time
Going
my children were growing up.
up, and did they go to school
And,
in Preston Road?
Yes,
And did they
went.
go to Hayden?
Yes, they went to
The Liberals then
Liberal,
now, I
but
see.
they were both of them.
Under Reagan.
And now, may I tell you the story of how Anthony was bar mitzvah? He is the first boy, I think, I've been told, that ever was bar mitzvah in the Liberal synagogue.
Because they
In
didn't
Preston
believe
Road.
in...
No, he was bar mitzvah in Whitfield Street.
Oh,
by
yes,
Miss
yes.
Lily. Miss Lily. When he became 11, getting on for 12, I once said to Harry, he's not learning anything to become bar mitzvah. Your father and mother, he's the only grandson. I think we ought to do something about it. What are we going to do? The Liberals don't believe in it. My daughter was going to be, she wasn't bar mitzvah, but they had in those days, like they have today,
Confirmation?
the confirmation. She went in, she was confirmed. I said, what are we going to do about Anthony? So he said, I'll tell you what, it's a mitzvah, we'll take him down to an Orthodox synagogue. It's the only thing we can do. So we took him down to Kingsbury, and they accepted him. Immediately Harry took him down. I wasn't with him. Took him down, they accepted him. A few weeks went by, and I could see Anthony wasn't learning anything. So I said, Anthony, what are you learning there? Nothing, he said. I said, what do you mean nothing? He says, they're not teaching me anything, they don't even take notice of me. So I said, well, how can he learn to become bar mitzvah if he's not learning anything? Anyway, we thought we'd stick it out for another little while. We stuck it out for perhaps another week or 2. And suddenly, one morning, on a Sunday morning, a gentleman called at our door, and he said, are you Mrs. Zalkin? Looked me up and down. I thought, God knows who he was. And he said, may I come in a moment? I said, yes, of course, come in. So he said to me, may I ask you a straightforward question? Yes. Can you please tell me why you belong to the Liberal synagogue? told him to mind his own business. See? I said, why do you ask? Mind your own business. So he said to me, you have sent your son down to be bar mitzvah. He said, why are you sending your son to us to be bar mitzvah and you belong to the liberal synagogue? You should belong to our synagogue. So I said, I belong to any synagogue that I wish, not what you tell me to do. I said, I do want my son to be bar mitzvah, and you've got to make him bar mitzvah if I want him to be. But we could see already it was not going to be any good. But I was very upset about it, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to Miss Lily and tell her the story. I couldn't anywhere tell her such a story, because she would have got very upset to think that I'd even taken my son there, you see. So I said to her, what are we going to do? Who did we tell? We told somebody, and they told us to go down to Miss Lily.
So to speak to
Oh,
Miss
I
Lily.
did go to Miss Lily, but I didn't tell her that I'd taken her already. I went to Miss Lily, and I said we have elderly parents, and my father was already dead. And my mother was alive, and both his parents were alive. And he's the only grandson. I said they're very disappointed to think that their only grandson isn't going to be bar mitzvah. Is there anything at all we can do? She says, Rosa, for you, I will do it. She says, we'd never do it. You know we don't believe in it. We don't think a boy of that age is really capable of being bar mitzvah. In those days, I didn't believe it. So I said, well, I'd be most grateful. So with that, what was the rabbi? His name?
What's his name now? Anyway, to cut a long story
Cut a
short,
long story short,
with her influence,
with
they
her
took him
influence,
in.
she was there, and there was another rabbi. He's very well known. I can't think of his name for the minute. Anyway, he was he was bar mitzvah then. He had a lovely bar mitzvah. He didn't sing it, he spoke it all, and he was a lovely big fellow, and it was very, very nice. It was a lovely ceremony. We had the usual nice bar mitzvah and party and so on, and that's how my son was bar mitzvah. And then after that, my children just went on with the liberal synagogue, you see, and we went on all the time. Eventually my daughter married into the Orthodoxy, but she isn't Orthodox. She belongs to the Reform synagogue in Edgware, and her husband was very much against Orthodoxy at Reform synagogue, Reform first. Liberal he wouldn't even hear about, but anyway, they belonged to the Reform, because my daughter didn't like the Orthodox. They did belong first to Stanmore, they live in Stanmore, there, the synagogue there. But she keeps, every Friday night he makes a kiddush. My son-in-law is more abroad than he's in England at the moment. He's in the jewellery line. And
I sometimes go over there with
and
Rosa.
they make a kiddush.
I make a kiddush
Make
for
a
her
kiddush.
children. She's got
Yeah,
four children.
Four children,
I
yes,
do
four. She
kiddush
has
for her.
4. My son has 3. My son married out, but the girl he married, she did take the liberal Judaism up, but she doesn't keep it, unfortunately.
Does she belong? Which synagogue?
She was in
Southgate.
Southgate, and Rabbi Jacobi married them, but she doesn't keep anything, and she says she's agnostic and she doesn't want to believe. And that actually also something to do with the Orthodoxy. And
What
she's
about her children? Did she have a son?
yes, she's got
And
a son.
does he
He's
have
not going to
bris?
be bar mitzvah, I'm
But he
sure.
had bris?
He's 11 now.
Yes, he had a bris. Yes, he
Oh,
did a
yes.
bris. But I
don't
don't
think
think
he
it's
did.
going to be bar mitzvah, and we keep quiet about it because it'll make too much of an upset. over
But
it
your
all.
My son
your
is
daughter,
very, very...
and he's married.
She's
their
married to
children.
yeah, she's
are-
got four lovely children, one of 20, nearly 20.
Although my son is very, very pro-Jewish, do you know what I mean?
Yes, of course I do.
He's,
And secretly he longs that his son should be bar mitzvah. But unfortunately, my daughter-in-law is one that's a little bit, to put it mildly, difficult.
it was also
Rosa,
to do. May I
Rosa.
just say why?
I don't think we ought to put this down
No,
here.
well, nobody knows the names of the.
No. Well, what happened was she was going to have this boy.
I can take out anything you
No,
don't want.
Rosa, don't go any
No,
further
can you just
about
please
No,
tell
no,
me
please,
why?
Rosa. I don't want...
I won't say the name, Hal.
A few times, and we've been to a communal Seder with them at the Liberal Synagogue
In Wembley.
in Wembley with Rabbi Jacobi. We've been there. So she hasn't thrown it away completely.
This is your daughter.
But she's surrounded by her own family. She's got 3 other sisters. And this is probably some influence on her. But I know, really, between you and I, that my son's like it, but I don't want to know.
No. So now, we've come to the. We haven't stopped with the factory in your work. When did you stop?
Well, then, as I say, we then eventually had this big business, and we were there. How long we were there? Also about 7 or 8 years, weren't we?
This is in Wells Street.
No, that was in Cleveland
Cleveland
Street.
Street.
Next door to the outpatients,
I know. Wells
Yes,
Street.
in Middlesex House.
Yes.
House.
And the lease
Yes.
was coming to an end as well. and things were very difficult just that particular period again. And the landlord wanted to give us a new lease. He was quite prepared to give it, providing that we guaranteed it personally. And we
It
were
was a limited company, but he wanted a personal guarantee, and I wouldn't give it.
We wouldn't give it because we felt that we were getting too old to risk our
With all those
home.
girls there, and 50 girls,
And they were very difficult girls. They were
to
getting,
manage.
they were all getting very difficult. The good ones were older, and the young ones wanted big wages and couldn't do what the older ones were doing, and it was all that kind of thing.
To
Which
cut
was
a
that
long
very,
story
very
short,
nice stuff, you see.
I liquidated the business and opened up a small factory with just 6 machines.
We had permission from the council to have. They were building small units right facing the
Post
tower.
office tower.
And
I know where you mean.
Cleveland
yes,
Street.
there.
Where the trimming actually
That's
is.
right, right underneath.
Yes.
And we had one of those units. And we
Very
went
nice,
in-
lot of Greeks there,
Yes,
isn't it?
we had a 3-year lease, and we thought, well, that we could take. And we took a 3-year lease there, but we only stayed there just over 2 years, didn't we?
We sold the last
We sold
one.
it. We sold the lease, and I got out of it in
So
short.
you were still in Preston Road, and then when did you move?
We moved at the same time as we closed everything up. We did it all together
You
in
sold the house and you
1974.
came-
and we
bought
came
this bungalow
here.
in
We
Pinner.
came here,
In
yes.
Pinner. And
This
when did you
belonged to
join the North Wellington Synagogue?
Well, that was just recently, not so long ago.
Funnily enough, next door here, next door to us, who's dead now, was Mr.
Bertram Jacobs
Bertram
lived
Jacobs.
next door to us.
He was our next
Should
door
know
neighbour.
that.
Our president, of course.
Yes.
That's right. And living in this house was a man, Mr. Simons, who's also a congregant at the shop we go to, although he doesn't speak to me.
But that's
another story.
point. But it doesn't speak to us for no reason at all.
We
This
bought
is
the
just-
house from him.
and we had it
We've done
built.
a lot
We
here.
did quite a lot to it.
This,
but
this is all this
it's
hall
all-
here is a
Yeah,
extension.
That's all beside the point.
We've done a
Anyway,
lot
the
here.
point is this, that we moved here, but mainly we chose this bungalow partly because his sister lives around the corner. We wanted to be near somebody, and we didn't like what we saw in Stanmore for the same money. And so we've been living here now. This is our 14th
We
year.
should have joined the.
And
We should
Bertram
have
Jacobs
joined.
was the one that spoke to you about this joining.
No, never.
No.
Oh,
never.
sorry, how
No, we belong to
We should have joined the Northwood Synagogue a long time ago.
We should have
As soon
joined
as
it when we moved here, but we didn't because of the singing. I sang in the choir,
I see.
you see. So I sang in the choir there, and I remained with them until just over 2 years ago, so about 2 years ago. And I remained with them, and then something happened, which I won't go into now. I don't want to. And I decided against going there any longer, and I just came right out of it altogether and joined the
Which
the
we're very
synagogue.
pleased about.
We were very pleased. I like it
Although-
very much. Although I must say, my husband thinks I'm very foolish, but I feel it's a little late. It was a little late. I was so involved with the singing and I knew all the rabbis as we
Why
went
is
right
it,
the way
Rosa,
through.
you don't join this
Well,
choir?
first of all, I still work. I work here. I have one bedroom, and I sew. And I belong to this other choir. And
That's enough.
yes, which I find enough. And I don't drive, which I find difficult. That's very, very difficult. And so I belong to this other choir. I quite like it. Nobody's ever asked me to join the choir there, and I wouldn't.
They wouldn't
ask
know
them.
if perhaps
They
they
do
sing.
know. They do know. There are several people. I won't mention who they all. Most of them know that I can sing, that I sing. But I'm really getting too old to join anything like that any longer now. So I am now 12 years in this choir, this London Ladies Choir. We have a lovely time. There's a load of women
They
all
sing
around
for
the world. It's our
charity.
own age. We sing for charity.
We've even been to
We've been
Israel.
to Israel.
see.
We went. Yes, we've been 3 times to Israel. The first time we went was with Rabbi Jacobi. He took us on a lovely tour. That was our first time. The second time we went privately with my sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And the third time I went with our choir. We had 6 concerts to do then. We were entertained by the mayor of
Rabbit.
Rabat.
Did you ever meet Lilian Rocha also? She arranges concerts in Israel.
No,
We've
I
had,
haven't. It's
we've had
possible.
a very varied life, actually.
So are you happy here in?
Oh,
in-
yes.
and
Oh,
you
we
like
love
the
we
North
love
Wellington
living
Synagogue?
here,
Oh, yes.
and we love being in this. We like going to the synagogue.
Synagogue.
We're very fond. We like the service because we can follow it all.
We
And
know it.
we know it back to front, and sure,
And
we
does
know all the singing, all the
your
songs.
daughter go to that synagogue? No,
No,
she's
my
Orthodox
daughter
because her husband's
Yes,
Orthodox.
yes. Well, she belongs to the Reform synagogue in Edgware.
And
Yes.
because
So
of my shingles, because of shingles.
Yes, I understand.
I haven't been anywhere.
We haven't been to the synagogue. I could have gone
Please
by
God,
train,
maybe
but
finish
I
the
like to go
synagogue.
with him. We like to go together.
I can't
So
go to
Shabbat,
shul.
we like to go, and I love going to shul. I think it's lovely on a Saturday morning to go just for an hour or so and sit and contemplate and listen to a nice service. And I think Rabbi Goldstein is very charming, very nice, and his wife is very nice, and we like it very much. But I feel it's a little late because I can't get involved with the synagogue anymore. Obviously, I'm getting to it. I don't drive. And I don't know what will happen if the choir packs up, because we're all getting older as well. It may go on for another year or so. And also my voice will probably go eventually. So I don't know what will happen. Nobody can look into the future. But I was very happy in Preston Road until the very last moment, so to speak. And I should have really joined this synagogue many years ago. And then perhaps
When you
things
came
would have
here.
been different, yes. And that's it.
Well, thank you both very, very much.
I don't know if it's any
indeed.
interest to you. I mean, there's lots more.
Mind you,
I'd
we've
want-
told you,
And now
we've
there's
sort of
others.
skirted round
Lots of things.
our history. There must obviously be interesting segments of our history that perhaps that never came out. But I think we've had a very
If there's
varied
any,
life.
yes, if there's anything that you can think of that you feel might be interesting that you'd like
I'll
to,
say
I
this,
can
and
come
whilst
back another
I'll say
time.
this, and whilst I was in the Air Force, I never met any anti-Semitism,
That's interesting, thank you very much.
never, at any time, anywhere. In fact, when we were I'll tell you this little story. Coming back from India when I was demobbed, I came back on the Georgic. It was a Cunard liner. It was a troop ship then. And during the passage home, there was an address on the public address system: will all Jewish personnel go to the orderly room? This is on the ship. I found my way to the orderly room and knocked the door, opened it, and I could see half a dozen Jewish faces. They weren't all RAF, we were soldiers and sailors. It was a big troop ship. We didn't know what we were there for. Suddenly the door opened and an officer came in. I could see immediately he's Jewish. And he introduced himself as the adjutant of the ship. And he said, I've called you all together here because it so happens that we're going through the Red Sea and it's Pesach time. And we're going to have a little service. And he gave us all a little siddur, and we had a little service. It wasn't a seder, it was a little afternoon service. And then when we left, we went up on deck, took a photograph, which I still have now. The officer took all our names and addresses, our home names and addresses, because we were going home for demob. And he sent us, each one of us, a picture. I've still got it in one of my albums. And he gave us, as we left him, he gave us each a bag with a box of matzahs, a bottle of wine, some kosher biscuits and chocolate, with the compliments and best wishes to the Jewish congregation of Bombay, from where the ship sailed from.
Isn't that nice?
Lovely, wasn't it?
Really
We were going through the Red Sea
When
at
you
Pesach
were
time.
in Bombay, did you have any services